Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Fashion And with me, Scott Schiavone, Fashion Curator. For my first episode, I've chosen to combine two great passions of mine. You may not know this, but back in the late 90s, young Scott Schiavone, that's me, left a small mining town for the big city lights of Glasgow to study history of art. And so the theme of this episode will be fashion and art. Of course, the relationship between fashion and art has been a long one. Therefore, this episode will focus on some of my favourite fashion and art moments from throughout history. As the amazing Julie Andrews once said while dressed in a pair of curtains at the top of a mountain, "Let's start at the very beginning, a very good place to start." And that place is painting. Although in most painted pictures the figures are wearing clothes, although that does depend on the kind of art you're looking at, the history of fashion has almost entirely been left out of the history of art. Ironic, considering fashion historians have had to rely on art history to form the basis of the study of dress. Before the 1700s, fashion historians looked to portraiture to see exactly what was worn, how it was worn, and by whom. The portrait therefore became a window to an exact time in history, and the fashions worn by the sitter created a time warp into that era. Unfortunately, before 1700, very few examples of clothing have survived in museum collections, and if they have, they are very rarely or never put on display because of their fragility. Another point to remember is that textiles were so valuable and expensive that cloth was reused, repurposed, and altered into other garments or objects. Now, how's that for sustainability? During the 16th and 17th centuries, fashion and art are associated with royalty and elite society, as it was them who would have afforded to have their portraits painted. Painting portraits of this nature, the artist had to ensure that each application of paint to the canvas clearly conveyed the richness of the fabric, the shimmering of the jewels, and the delicacy of the lace. Each type of textile, such as silk, velvet, wool, fur, silver or gold thread, had to be easily identifiable, and this required only the very best draftsmanship. Moving on to the 18th century, what we have to be thankful for is that a generous amount of clothing from the 18th century still exists, and art from the period helps to visually document the changes in fashionable dress. Depicting contemporary fashion was a great way for artists to show off their skill. Having the luxury of being able to compare actual garments with their depiction in paint can give us a greater understanding of the fashion and art relationship. From around the 1720s to the 1770s, the artistic and decorative style known as Rococo reigned supreme. The Rococo style was possibly one of the greatest influences on 18th century fashion. Jean-François de Troyes and Jean-Antoine Watteau documented in paint contemporary fashions of the 1720s and 30s, one of the most popular styles being the sack-back dress or robe à la Française. François Boucher's Madame de Pompadour from 1759 illustrates the epitome of Rococo style in fashion. Boucher also painted mythological scenes like Daphnis and Chloe from 1743, which is part of the Wallace collection in London. This painting propels us into the 20th century, bringing to our attention one of Britain's most prolific designers and one of my favourites, Dame Vivienne Westwood. Here is Dame Westwood, dressed in the style of Elizabeth I, kinda like if photography had been invented in the 16th century. Westwood has referenced the 18th century quite a lot in our collections. She is on record saying that she would spend hours at the Wallace collection studying the paintings of Boucher and Watteau. To quote the Grande Dame of British fashion, "I am a great believer in copying. There has never been an age in which people have so little respect for the past." Her autumn-winter 1990 portrait collection featured a corset photograph printed with a detail from Boucher's Daphnis and Chloe. In addition to that, her spring-summer 1996 collection saw the stunning Linda Evangelista strut her stuff down that runway in the aptly named Watteau dress, the inspiration clearly taken from Watteau's paintings of fashionable clothing. I think we should also squeeze in here John Galliano for Dior and Jeremy Scott and Moschino, both designers clearly using Rococo fashion and portraiture as a reference point for their collections. So back in the 18th century, by the 1780s, we see fashion starting to relax slightly. In 1783, one painting which caused much controversy also launched the popularity of the chemise dress, and that painting was of course Elizabeth Vigée-Lebrun's depiction of Marie Antoinette. This painting caused such a stir because the chemise dress was far too informal for a queen to be portrayed in front of her subjects. Vigée-Lebrun was ordered to do it again, and this time told to portray the queen in a more suitable, more formal attire. By the 19th century, we start to see the fashion and art relationship take a different turn. During this period, fashion starts to become the focal point, sometimes occupying 3/4 of the canvas. Now I'm excited because at this point, I can introduce to you one of my favourite paintings where fashion takes centre stage, and that is Jean-Auguste Dominique Ingres's Madame Watessier. Ingres received the commission in 1844, but due to various delays and other complications, the painting was not completed until 1856. Because fashionable dress had changed during that 12-year period, Ingres decided to swap out the plainer styles of the 1840s and replace them with the more extravagant styles of the 1850s. Compare the earlier portrait of the same woman by the same artist, dated 1851, and you'll see what I'm talking about. This was obviously an important decision for the artist and indeed the sitter. She was a society woman, and she would have wanted to have appeared looking elevated, rich, and draped in the season's latest styles. Now that we are well into the 19th century, we cannot forget the amazing Franz Xaver Winterhalter, whose high society female clientele almost always appeared nestled within a fluffy cloud of white tulle. Winterhalter painted nearly every empress, queen and lady in Europe, the majority of them looking like they had just stepped out of the salon of Europe's leading couturier, Charles Frederick Worth. Worth moved to Paris in 1846. By 1858, he had set up his own fashion empire and pretty much exclusively dressed every fashionable empress, queen and lady in Europe, and so the connection is made. Here we have two images where Winterhalter's genius in painting the latest looks is evident. One, the Empress Eugenie and her ladies in waiting, and the other, the Princess Metternich. I think we can confidently say that both images almost definitely depict fashions designed and created by Worth. Winterhalter developed an astonishing amount of finesse, especially when painting delicate ethereal fabrics. In fact, it was his sophisticated depictions of haute couture, alongside his ability to create a flattering likeness, that made him the darling of high society and the official court painter to the crowned heads of Europe. Under Napoleon III, Paris was transformed by an ambitious urban plan. In 1863, Charles Baudelaire issued a challenge to artists, urging painters to leave their studios, mingle with the crowds on the streets, and draw inspiration for the authentic characteristics of contemporary life. This move towards real life was embraced and captured by the Impressionists, and fashion became fashion for fashion's sake. Painters of modern life painted modern people wearing modern clothes. Manet's Music in the Tuileries Garden from 1862 captured this new Paris. The crowds are dressed in the fashionable clothes symptomatic of their position in society. The men dressed in their usual sombre formal daywear, and the women in an array of styles and colours with all the necessary accessories including fans, shawls and bonnets. Renoir's La Parisienne depicts a young, frivolous, fashion-conscious woman. Her walking costume is absolutely the latest fashion. Her overall silhouette is slender and extravagant, playful and feminine, all the qualities that define La Parisienne. Also by Renoir, The Swing from 1876 provides the inspiration for Yves Saint Laurent's Autumn-Winter 2000 Haute Couture Bride. The bridal gown was literally named bridal gown in tribute to Auguste Renoir. James Tissot became famous as a painter of fashionably dressed women. A major exhibition of his work took place in Paris in 1885, where he showed 15 large paintings in a series called La Femme à Paris. These paintings depicted different types and classes of women, shown in professional and social scenes, each one clothed in the very latest Parisian fashions. Also in the 1880s, Georges Seurat painted A Sunday on La Grande Jatte, another park scene occupied by fashionable society enjoying their leisure time. Of course, the star of this painting is the figure in portrait who is dressed in the typical shelf-like bustle of the 1880s. What is it about the 80s and ridiculous silhouettes? As we move into the 20th century, in the first 2 decades, a printing technique known as pochoir was reinvigorated. A new period of collaboration between fashion and art followed as fashion designers worked directly with artists. Couturier Paul Poiret and illustrator Paul Aribe joined forces in 1908 to produce La Robe de Paul Poiret. This publication was a huge success and created a trend for luxuriously illustrated fashion catalogues. In the 1930s, Elsa Schiaparelli made close connections to the art world, especially the Cubist and Surrealist movements. Salvador Dali and Jean Cocteau were amongst the artists who collaborated with her. You may recognise this evening coat from the collection at the V&A, which blends Schiaparelli's design aesthetic with Cocteau's artistic hand. Schiaparelli's tear dress was a direct collaboration with Salvador Dali. The trompe-l'oeil design, which depicts skin being torn away to reveal magenta-coloured flesh underneath, gross, is directly copied from Dali's painting, 3 young surrealist women holding in their arms the strings of an orchestra. And of course, we cannot talk about fashion and art in the 20th century without mentioning Yves Saint Laurent. Saint Laurent maintained a dialogue with art throughout his career. We've already mentioned his couture bride tribute to Renoir, but it was first and foremost modernism that he loved and that provided the inspiration for his 1965 Mondrian collection. Saint Laurent's treatment of the subject was quite literal. I mean, the canvas is literally transported onto the dress. Saint Laurent said that Mondrian is purity, and one can go no further in purity in painting. This is a purity that joins with that of the Bauhaus. The masterpiece of the 20th century is a Mondrian. If you wanted to, you could literally talk about Saint Laurent and his references to art for a whole episode. Throughout his career, he's referenced Tom Wesselmann, Van Gogh, Matisse, and the Cubists Georges Braque and Pablo Picasso, whose influence was most recently seen in Moschino's Spring-Summer 2020 collection. This collection saw Kaia Gerber transformed into the girl with the mandolin. By the time we get to the present, 2 of my favourite fashion and art collaborations have been Raf Simons and his debut as creative director at Christian Dior. For his Autumn-Winter 2012 couture collection, Simons collaborated with American artist Sterling Ruby, using wrap printing, a really difficult technique, to create stunning contemporary gowns based on the traditional house codes. In 2015, we had Viktor and Rolf. Viktor and Rolf named their 2015 couture collection Wearable Art. The designers created a kind of installation fashion and art show whereby they carried canvases painted with Dutch old masters onto the catwalk and literally transformed them into dresses. Amazing. And so what about sculpture and architecture? I think the influence of sculpture and architecture is most prevalent from about 1790 to 1810. White was the dominant colour and styles were inspired by classical Greece and Rome. The silhouette was neoclassical, slim, and based on the tunics worn by female figures in classical sculpture. Now Yves Saint Laurent makes another appearance here. His Autumn-Winter 1969 collection also featured garments inspired by classical sculpture. In collaboration with sculptor Claude Leland, Saint Laurent created light, floaty chiffon dresses with busts and waist sculptures set in galvanised copper. And please don't forget about one of my main men, Charles James. In the 1940s and 50s, Charles James dominated the mid-century couture market. Both Christian Dior and Cristobal Balenciaga refer to him as the greatest dressmaker of the age. James created some of the most extraordinary sculptural clothes. The sculptural quality of his work is epitomised in two dresses, the swan dress and, of course, the four-leaf clover dress. James considered the four-leaf clover dress to be the culmination of his career. The skirt is cantilevered in three structurally distinct parts, cut with curves that work in opposite directions to create the distinct four-leaf clover shape. Basically, it's an engineered architectural, sculptural masterpiece. And lastly, I really want to mention the great Roman couturier Roberto Capucci. One of my favourite Capucci designs is the 1956 Nove Gonne, meaning 9 dresses gown. 9 skirts combined into one dress, creating a sculptural cascade of asymmetrical layers. It was featured in an ad for the 1957 Cadillac 62 convertible. Now in the foreground of the ad you can see the bases of columns, which could potentially have provided the inspiration for Capucci's 1978 Doric column dress. Evoking the purity and understated strength of the Doric column, this dress is pure architecture. So the special relationship between fashion and art has been present for centuries. From what we've covered today, it's clear that the interplay between fashion and art has shifted from mere depictions on canvas to actual wearable art. So it's a very special relationship, and I'm sure that it's one that will continue, especially since more recently it's been debated whether or not fashion can actually be considered an art form. Thank you for tuning in today. Please share and please subscribe to my channel by clicking the subscribe button below. And I can't wait to welcome you back soon with more from Fashion And with me, Scott Schiavone, Fashion Curator.